Oh, Canada. How does the next line go?
No idea. I think that's all there is to it.
Go, Canada, go.
Oh, Canada, go Canada.
That's what they should change it to.
They've awoken a sleeping giant
They have. Finally.
with their tyranny.
Finally. It's not, well, it's, yeah, it's the first biggest, well, it's the biggest expression in North America so far against it.
And it comes from Canada, where
Canada,
that
I
have
know.
been pretty much, especially Ontario, Eastern Province, that has been really under the thumb, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that it came from there. I mean, it's very.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it took a specific thing to trigger it, namely Trudeau government saying, truckers, you're not going on the roads unless to get
You're vaccinated, yeah.
you're vaccinated and your passes are up to date. So that would, I think the scenario they were facing was something like 38,000 people would no longer be, have the papers necessary to work by mid-January. And that was the spark, I think. Initially, it was going to be a roadblock like on cross-border points between the US and Canada. But maybe it just morphed as it went along. Then by last Sunday, a plan was in action. And it's just been incredible. Like they crossed the whole of Canada. It began in Vancouver. And you crossed the Trans-Canadian Highway going the whole way across the continent, basically, to Ottawa. And then it's fed in. There are other convoys coming from places like Edmonton and then up from the US as well. On the other side, on the east, far eastern side of Canada, convoys joining them from Nova Scotia, Montreal, Quebec. Super impressive. The government, it's interesting.
And not really reported on.
No, nothing.
Reported on
Nothing
very
in
little.
France, very little in the Anglophone media.
Why?
Why? Yeah, of course.
It's
Yeah.
bizarre. It's actually really bizarre because throw up that JPEG I sent you, Scotty, the capture one. It's just this is Canadian. Oh no, this is Sunday Times. So actually, this is today, and so this Canadian trucker business has been going on the plan was developed a long time, quite a few weeks ago, I think, obviously, and then but it's been on the road for almost a week now, I think, or just short of a week. Converging on Ottawa, 50,000 trucks, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, obviously, along the route, and then in Ottawa, arrived more or less yesterday, last night, today. But this is just from today, as you can see, 30th of January. And this is the Sunday Times. And this is one of the few. There was one other article yesterday in the BBC, but as far as the Western media, the whole week that this was all going on, nothing.
Yeah.
And the BBC yesterday and the Times in the UK today, and that's more or less all you can really find across the mainstream media in terms of reporting on this. And of course, you notice a little dig there, a little distortion in the headline, where the Freedom of Convoy of anti-vax truckers. And of course, it's much more than anti-vax, but they prefer to present
that
it
headline's
that
not
way.
bad. I've heard far worse from Canadian media.
Yeah, for sure. Extremists, fascists.
So here it's saying Trudeau forced into hiding.
Yeah, and that's the main
true.
thing.
As quote unquote in quotes Freedom Convoy of anti-vax truckers rolls into town. Obviously, anti-vax is a dig, but
the interesting, the reason I'm highlighting this is the fact that you have the Prime Minister of a major Western nation, of one of the Five Eyes, right? The elite of the Western nations, Canada, Justin Trudeau has gone into hiding.
Yeah.
Like
for reasons of national security.
well, really like a,
like a fleeing dictator in a country undergoing regime change.
pretty much.
Think Kiev 2014.
Or any number of examples you could give over the years.
Yeah.
Of people who, in the face of leaders of countries, in the face of popular revolt,
The president of
especially
Afghanistan last August.
usually tyrants of some description,
Yeah.
are the ones who flee. I mean, it's not always the case. It depends on the nature of the uprising, let's say, or the protests. But it does seem to be a bit of a hallmark of corrupt or tyrannical governments that, in response to popular anger at their policies, instead of actually staying on at the helm of the ship and addressing them and meeting the people, they basically run away. The implication being that they have to run away because their lives are in danger.
Yeah.
And why are their lives in danger? I mean, well, you can have a population that are all, hopped up on some kind of drugs or something, and they're just out for blood and they want to kill somebody, anybody. And you could justify getting off scene in that situation. But this is Canada we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is, land of bacon and maple syrup and stuff, and
migrating geese.
and very polite Canadians.
Yeah.
So if you've whipped up Canadians to the point that you actually feel as a leader of the country that your life is in danger from these people, it probably means you've done something wrong rather than these people are a bunch of, extremist
As he
crazies.
said, he did address the issue once in a press conference. These are, what do they call them? Extremists? A fringe minority with unacceptable views. At least he scaled down from what he had previously said about protest against mandates, a couple of weeks ago, when he said these people are basically racist and misogynist.
Right. When you, I mean, that's a desperate attempt, and it was, I think it should have been seen and was seen by anybody with any sense, seen for what it was at the time when, like a few weeks ago, like you said, he called people who didn't agree with government policies misogynist and racist. That's a ridiculous thing to say.
Yeah.
It's simply not true, and it's an attempt to divide the population or to alienate the sections of the population that aren't in favour of your policies, and you shouldn't try to alienate them. I mean, the truth should be able to, the truth should be your argument should be, your weapon, let's say, for anybody in that situation. If Trudeau thinks that these people are racist and misogynist, then surely that will out itself, and everybody else will see that. I mean, it's hard if you're an ardent racist and misogynist, it's hard to cover that up or for that not to be apparent to everybody else with any sense. But that apparently isn't the case. He's just calling them names. He's trying to divide the population, and then whenever they basically march on the capital, he flees like a tin-pot dictator from some poor country, and again gets back to what I'm saying. The media doesn't report on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty big story, except if the media doesn't report on it, then it's not a big story, right?
Yeah, well, same goes for so many massive protests across the West these last 2 years. London, England had some phenomenal turnouts, 1 million plus, arguably as big as, in fact, the massive anti-war one in February 2003 before the Iraq War. 2 million plus people. That was reported on. You couldn't ignore it back then. But they have practiced now these last 2 years just not reporting on signs of protest. Now, they probably explain that to themselves as well. This is a dangerous moment politically. So they're aware. I don't think it's an unconscious thing on their part. I think the thinking process, if it's not explicitly stated from media company owner down to editor level, down to journalist level, it's understood instinctively, if nothing else, that this is a politically sensitive moment. If we show the scale, we will show the people, our readership, listeners, watchers, that there is a mass behind it. That will sway them politically and influence their view politically of what's going on in the country. Right. So they are instinctively defending
the stuff that was always done in the past by governments undercover, let's say, in the sense of manipulating, or let's say, maybe they wouldn't say manipulating, directing public opinion in a certain direction that the government thinks is positive for the people and the country and stability and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff in the past happened largely beyond the purview of the average person. But these days it's very much in your face, and more and more people are aware of the fact that, and the people doing it, the government and the media, are much more open about the fact that they're doing it. I mean, they don't say it explicitly, but it comes out through the media and the way that the media, so it's much more blatant today. We have much more blatant evidence, or clear evidence, that governments and the media do get together essentially to direct public opinion, attitudes, beliefs in a certain direction, and they've always done that, but now they're doing it. Maybe it's the reason in the past they were doing it, and maybe the way they did it in the past was for positive reasons, or generally positive reasons, but the reason it's becoming more obvious today is because they're doing it for what are pretty clearly not positive reasons or negative reasons or malicious reasons. Yeah. And when you start to do that, I suppose you have to show your hand a little bit more, you know what I mean? And it does appear in the public discourse or for the public attention, it appears much more than if it's something that's benign or even positive, like in the past, where government would make decisions, the media would send out certain messages, and the messages would be positive. But today, the messages that they're using to direct public opinion and beliefs tend to be quite negative, like calling people misogynist and racist, right?
Yeah.
And that brings it out, that kind of goes, hang on a minute, what's going on here, And I suppose the fact that they're doing it for malicious reasons, that it's not a good reason. I mean, labeling an entire section of the population racist and misogynist for a prime minister to do that is not a positive thing. It's not a good thing for the country. You can't spin it in a positive way.
Yeah. And they're undermining themselves in the process. In a way, you don't need any kind of their own effort to influence by not showing, if that's the case, or when they do make a statement on it, a kind of oblique statement. For example, before the announcement yesterday that Trudeau had, quote, gone into hiding for his safety, right?
Right.
Was the announcement first of maybe Wednesday, Thursday, that the Trudeau had tested positive, or someone in his vicinity had tested positive for COVID. Therefore, he was going to retire and go home and self-isolate for 5 days,
right.
i.e. over this weekend.
Right.
So, and you see, okay, so let's say that's true, right? And that just happens to be the case. But they undermine it. They undermine it 36 hours later by saying, actually, you won't find him at home. He's gone into hiding. And that's all I said. Well, that's enough. People who are already thinking about it, who are already worked up about it, don't need to hear any more. There's nothing more you can influence them one way or the other.
Yeah.
They interpret that as he's afraid of us. He's on the run.
Yeah.
And that he won't listen to us. He won't be there to receive our complaints and therefore to pass comment on them one way or another. Mm-hmm. There will be no political engagement.
He's already passed.
You can all come to Ottawa. We're not here to talk to you.
Yeah.
So you can come here and freeze it out for minus 30 degrees
don't
if you
care,
want.
yeah.
We don't care.
And does that imply nothing's going to be done in terms of meeting protesters?
That's the question. What goes forward? I've seen a few snippets of interviews. In fairness, between Canadian alternative media / new media, of left and right persuasion, whatever, people will get down on the streets and actually still stick a microphone in front of people's faces. Between them and local media corporations in Canada, they did do a lot of on the spot. What's your reasons? What's your thinking? What do you think is going to happen? What do you intend to do? And a lot of them are saying, well, they arrived in these trucks. The trucks aren't empty. They bought like 2 weeks of supplies with them.
Yeah?
They're going to live in the trucks.
Right.
So they intend to stick it out.
Right. So it's a
bunch
siege.
Of them. It's a siege. I don't know. I heard last night that in response, police in Ottawa shut down a number of key entry points to the city. Is that too late? I'm not sure. I don't know. There's very little information and any official kind of surveillance. Just the police, for example, they would usually give updates on a large event like this, saying, look, don't try to come down this way or that way because they're closed off.
Well, they did say that.
They did a bit.
Well, they put out a message telling Ottawans to not come into the city centre for your security. Right. Everything's for security, right? Everything.
Of course.
But to throw up just as an aside, not even kind of an aside, the Guardian article I just sent you there, Scotty. You think the same seems to be going on in New Zealand. Just a quick update, just as an aside, won't dwell on New Zealand or anything like that, but just in the horsey face herself.
Joe Ardern.
Look at her, she's really concerned. This is a woman, people probably know who she is, listen to this, but she's this kind of...
Is she, though?
Is she? Why? Oh, she may be a horse. I don't know. She may be... But I wouldn't say she's... No, she's not a man, but I'll leave it open about whether or not she's actually got some equine genetics in her. But she tested positive. I mean,
right.
she has come under fire in a less aggressive, overt kind of way, but definitely I have a brother who lives in New Zealand, and he's saying, yeah, people down here are not happy about what's going on because, of course, New Zealand is isolated down there in Middle Earth with all the hobbits and stuff, and it's like a separate planet in a certain sense. Everybody goes there to get away from stuff, including from COVID and viruses and stuff, and stay away from modern crass civilization. So everything that happens, at least from a pandemic or viral point of view happens later in New Zealand, right? It's the last outpost. So it's basically late and everything. And Omicron is only hadn't appeared there until just a few weeks ago, or not even. They had nothing, and then maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago they had their first case.
And it's
First case of Omicron, which is Omicold, which is a nothing burger.
it's devastating the population.
Well, they have 9 cases of Omicold, which is
You mean 9,000, right?
no 9, just 9.
9.
9 out of 5 million people. Yeah,
Okay, and they're all
fine. Yeah, but anyway, so they started imposing this. They said, no, this isn't lockdown. It's a kind of like traffic light kind of system type thing, which basically it's lockdown, right? They have rules that are similar to types of lockdown rules, and depending on where you are in the country, because the 9
it's
cases
individual
weren't-
specific. It's targeted lockdown. If you are flagged as being in the vicinity of,
right? But
Go
there's
home.
also restrictions in
go
terms
home
of
for 24 days.
yeah. There's also it's kind of fun. I mean, I find it hard not to laugh at some of the stuff at this point. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's also general rules about the numbers of people gathering together and wearing masks and blah 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 blah. Right? So it's more of the lockdown stuff, and people in New Zealand, at least,
It's midsummer there, right?
exactly, yeah. So it's ridiculous. Yeah, midsummer, a cold. It's nothing, right? And the government has imposed these restrictions, and within a couple of weeks, obviously, her reading the feels or the sentiment among the population was that I need to get COVID and get off site first. So she basically is isolated. She's gone off scene for however long it takes for her to decide, or her advisors to decide what to actually do about the situation, because there aren't mass protests, or there have been protests in New Zealand, and if they don't do something about the measures they've imposed so far, I think people will. There could be
Of course,
some uprisings
this
in
speaks
New
to
Zealand.
the geopolitical interest in why the question to why there's not enough, hardly any media footage
Right.
of what's happening in Canada.
Right.
It's a containment issue across those 5 eyes, across the Anglosphere. Britain, they have in mind, the United States, obviously.
Yeah.
New Zealand, Australia, and others, neighbors or politically aligned countries. They have to contain the images, just the images, never mind putting a negative or positive spin on it.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't let people become aware that this is happening.
Yeah.
And therefore, but now it's not working because there's a convoy that has started in Australia.
In Australia.
Maybe it'll fit. Maybe it won't have anywhere near the same uptake as we saw in Canada. For whatever reason, the conditions in Canada were go for mass support.
There's also stuff in Holland, truckers in Holland, and in Italy as well.
Well, there's a campaign underway to get truckers to converge on Brussels,
Right.
from across Europe.
Right.
Don't know where that's at right now. The only reason we know about the scale and the current status of the Canadian one is because of social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
There's
sure.
just too much footage taken by people themselves and uploaded.
Yeah, there's a picture of Trudeau in his bunker, basically, that I got from an inside source.
Yeah.
I'll throw it up there, Scotty, just so you can see.
That's not Trudeau.
It is. That's him. That's him outside the bunker. He's planning how he's going to take down all those misogynists and racists in their trucks.
Oh, that's going to trigger someone.
Good. Anyway,
He's going to unleash the Panzer Divisions.
the Panzer Divisions, yes, multiple Panzer Divisions. Anyway, that was just gratuitous, so we'll carry on.
Gratuitous, Joseph.
Yeah.
So, it's in the space of 10 days, Boris Johnson went into isolation to avoid a political scandal
Right.
over the amount of shit-faced partying he did throughout lockdowns. Then Trudeau did it. They basically admitted to get away from Ottawa because of the current protest. And now New Zealand. Yeah. 3 in the space of 10 days. It's
a bit shameless, isn't it?
it is like, and it's obvious. Like I say, it's not. I don't know how many people is it obvious. The interesting thing about Canada is this changes the dynamic a bit. We've been basically calculating roughly 10% of people fundamentally changed their worldview as a result of the whole experience of the last 2 years. and we sort of it seems to be stuck there for now. In terms of the people who will actually internally at least go, no, this is too much, too far, stop, you know. But Canada, that was more than 10% of the population. Now, I'm not talking about the numbers that actually mobilized and moved across the country, but the sheer numbers of people along the routes as well. The
I'd
sheer
say-
numbers in Ottawa today. Do we want to show some footage of
Yeah.
this? Is from yesterday. It's currently 10 a.m. in Ottawa, so it's probably too early to have any footage of downtown Ottawa this Sunday, but this is the state situation in the city yesterday. I'm sure people have seen lots of this, so we won't play too much, but I think it's drone footage around Parliament Square and the two main roads leading into it.
We will not comply.
Right.
You don't want the awesome beats?
Institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
Okay, that's enough. Is it a revolution? We'll see. But it's certainly a massive protest. Now, I can't imagine that the government in Canada just spent the last week watching this and not doing anything. I'm sure they have all kinds of things in action. Part of which is information containment, almost certainly. But there's probably more to it than that. I mean, that convoy was massive. It was 70 kilometers long by the time at the end. So I doubt they're all getting in there. I heard that they were going to try and convince people, oh, it's a safety hazard. Please don't come into the city. Go over here and park at the airport, which is obviously outside the city, way outside. So if anyone was going there with the intention of besieging the city,
The government,
causing a gridlock that forces elites, government types in Ottawa to change, they're probably already a couple of moves ahead of you on that.
well, the government's a problem. Like, I mean, yeah, they can wait it out and they can have a kind of siege or whatever and try and just sit there in their trucks for forever and have protests and you know, force the government to try and back down or change their policies, whatever. But the government has a problem in that sense where if they were to back down on their restrictive COVID policies in the face of that kind of mobilization, well, that sends the signal that this is how it's done, right? When the government steps too far, or despite their justifications for why they're imposing these restrictive, you know, fairly tyrannical policies on the population, they claim it's for public health or whatever. But if enough truckers get together, for example, and people protest outside the Parliament in Ottawa and stay there for a couple of weeks and they back down, well, then that's how it's done. Anytime the government ever does anything that people don't like, this is how you fix
Yeah.
it. So,
They have backed down on the trucker mandate.
right.
That apparently like a week ago or more. But at this point, it's snowballing into its own thing. Their point now is very simply end all the mandates, revert back to the status quo before all
Yeah.
of this.
The old normal.
All mandates. Because you got to...
What I don't understand, and that's happened in different places, right? Austria, for example, has backed down on their
they?
Yes,
On the mandatory vaccines for everyone.
yes.
Right.
So, of course, they have a narrative for it. But in the case of Canada, how does the government justify that? If they say it's absolutely necessary that all truckers, from a public health point of view, all truckers get vaccinated or something bad will happen, and then they back down on it, what does that say about the policy in the first place? What does that say about their statement that this is absolutely necessary in the first place when they very quickly back down in the face of public pressure? I mean, it can't be that serious. It can't have been.
Yeah.
They can't have been genuinely concerned about some kind of viral spread or public health emergency due to truckers not being vaccinated. If they just go, okay, we won't ask you to get vaccinated. Do you know what I mean? And that itself, when people see that that's happening, it starts to sow reasonable and justified doubt in a lot of other government statements
Yeah.
about the dire need for this or the public health emergency, etc. You know?
We actually have some interesting comments from viewers, listeners.
Yeah.
Traveler Ryan says multiple convoys in Australia are converging on Canberra from different directions, expected to arrive tomorrow. Brett in Finland says, my kid's mother here in Finland is constantly streaming stuff from Canada this weekend, saying things like, this is a crucial moment in history. And then he also said that there's a group in Finland that wants to make their own convoy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. This is kind of people power. And unfortunately, it took two years to. Although you have to give people some time, right, to acclimatize to or to get a read on the situation and understand that this is the government going too far, basically.
To acquire the conviction and the courage, as people have been memeing all week long, courage is contagious. And when it happens, it's also very liberating. Even if people just go home and nothing fundamentally changes, the encouragement you get from following something that has up till now has terrified you.
Yeah.
The fear of stepping out and being hit on the head, by the government's hammer,
Right.
will have changed your entire makeup completely. Because now you've made the effort, you've gone out. They had people arriving in their cars by the thousands at key pit stop along the Trans-Canadian Highway, which is the Arctic desert for most of it. They turned up in the middle of nowhere. All these trucks turned their lights on, and trucks 1 to 10 bought antifreeze liquid. Trucks 10 to 30 bought fuel. Trucks 30 to 50 bought food. They had
well organized.
They had mobile barbecue stations set up and everything. They had fireworks displays, the whole 9 yards, drones set up. People, there's so much carrying capacity when you're doing something creative.
Yeah.
And for the people.
Yeah,
You
by
have
the
more
people.
than enough, and it's contagious and it overflows. And one thing, they talk to each other and
Yeah.
they go, actually, yeah, I'm
didn't
pissed with
realize.
all the mandates. I'm
Yeah.
not just pissed with why it affected me personally. My liberty is connected to everyone else's.
Right. Yeah. And I'd say it's a majority of Canadians at this point, and I'd say it's a majority of people in most
Well,
countries
this
at
is
this point.
why I was saying this is more than your 10% here.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Were you going to show something there?
yeah, can you throw that up, Scotty? This is status quo on the books in Quebec. This is the shit Canadians are putting up with. You probably saw this, Joe. This is January 24th. So Monday last week, it's reported that Quebec bans unvaccinated from buying groceries at Walmart, Costco. If you scroll down a bit, it specifies what that means. It's legislation. Okay.
Yeah. They're
That's
banned
it.
from buying groceries at big box stores, including Walmart and Costco, while people wishing to access pharmacies inside those outlets will require a store escort. So
Yeah.
some COVID marshal will come along and say, okay, I'm going to take you to this specific area where you can only buy pharmaceutical products, and then you have to
food.
escort or food, and I can escort you back out then.
That's you remember I was going to say that's Gestapo. Like it's worse. The Gestapo was an office in Nazi Germany you could report a neighbor to. This is full-time monitoring by co-opted Gestapo people from among the general population. It's insane.
Go down to that next tweet. Unvaccinated parking spot in Quebec Walmart. While they wait to be escorted, so you walk into escort and you have to stay in your little box there,
Like a horse.
like a horse. Yeah,
I'm seeing a pattern here.
yeah,
Horses.
yeah. Jacinda Ardern should be in one of those permanently. Yeah, I won't go on about Jacinda Ardern. See, I found her interesting just because she was so wonderful and so awesome for so long over the past number of years. She was like a wonderful example.
A
But
hero.
there's a video actually.
Heroine.
There's a video of her actually talking about. Maybe we should actually put that up, just to as an example, Just how do you spell Jacinda? Jacinda.
Jac.
Yeah.
The one where she's
Yeah.
from last week.
Yeah.
She was remarking on. She was
suicides.
remarking on the impact the legislation would have on people.
Yeah.
Oh, on the effects on the rates of suicide in New Zealand.
Right.
And the freaky thing
People
isn't
probably
what
saw
she
it.
said, but her facial expressions while she was saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, I have it here somewhere.
You keep looking.
Yeah.
The province in Canada of Nova Scotia. This is the first kind of real kind of formal response of any government
Yes, she is.
agencies in Canada. Nova Scotia has banned protesters from going along the highways in support of the truckers, for their safety, of course. Even though not a single person was killed during the entire convoy across the whole width of Canada.
This is an example. It's an interesting psychological case, basically, but just play that and you can.
Sad facts for New Zealand is that everyone knows someone who has taken their own life. Now, we're a small country, less than 5 million people, but last year over 600 people committed suicide. And of course, that's only one marker of well-being. And you saw in the video reel that played, 1 in 4 people in their lifetime will experience a mental health issue. And so for us, this is something that affects everyone, because either you have someone in your family who may be affected, a friend, or you yourself. And so they say in politics, everything is personal. And for me, the issue of mental health was deeply personal. I've lost friends, and I wouldn't have to look far in my cabinet to find others who have as well. So for us, it's a moral issue. Equally, it's an economic issue as well. When you have so many people affected by mental health, of course that affects your productivity, and there's good reason why business should be taking this on, for both that moral imperative but that economic imperative as well. So for both reasons, it's a 5% loss to GDP, but also the moral reason, it's a real priority for us.
Dr. Chavanda, tell us a little bit more
So something
about how
in the background there, a smiley kind of thing, when she's talking about that, which is like you'd have to get deep into the psychological analysis of her, but it's that smiliness that has made her very popular in theory over her term, over her time as
terms now
as Prime Minister of New Zealand. Yeah, but a lot of people were onto her in a certain sense, onto that cutesy kind of folksy woman of the people, just normal woman. She brought her baby to Parliament, all that kind of stuff, and it's it smacks of manipulation, and people were right to think that it was and is manipulative. I mean, it may be very natural for her to do that, and it probably is, but it doesn't rule out the fact that it could be pathological. You know what I mean? And power corrupts, as we know, and all that kind of stuff. So, we're at a point in history where, generally speaking, the political class, you can take it as a given that the vast majority of the political class, especially in the West, are up to no good, basically, no matter what way they look or what they say. There's more than enough evidence that that's what's going on. You can start from that start with that premise, basically, and go from there. It'll keep you closer to the truth than.
Yeah, and they themselves articulate this kind of difference between the elites and most other people.
Yeah.
Do you want to? I have it here. Do you want to hear what this woman at the World Economic Forum said I don't know. It was a couple of weeks ago. It was uploaded a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Who is she now? I don't know. She's speaking at the World Economic Forum event held in Dubai, I think, UAE.
She's a.
I think it was this month. It's uploaded this month.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a listen to her.
At Davos a few years ago, the Edelman survey showed us that the good news is the elite across the world trust each other more and more. So we can come together and design and do beautiful things together. The bad news is that in every single country they were polling, the majority of people trusted that elite less. So we can lead, but...
Right.
I wonder what the rest of that is. We can lead, but we may need to start using big sticks.
Yeah. But it's okay to say that kind of stuff these days.
It's uncanny. It's frank. It's they know it, kind of thing.
Yeah. So obviously the Canadian trucker stuff, it's all about COVID, government overreach, government at the it's getting to the point where it's becoming more and more clear to the average person that the whole COVID narrative is a ruse for government control over the population.
Profits and power, yeah.
Yeah, self-interest basically. And I suppose, well, last week we talked about COVID, as we did most other weeks. We talked about COVID, and we had a video by a guy called John Campbell. He's a nurse educator. He's got a lot of followers on YouTube. He's very much mainstream in terms of he's pro-vaccination, and he's just spent the past 2 years. He had a YouTube channel a long time before that, talking about medical issues and all that kind of stuff. And he just went on the pandemic thing. And he publishes has published daily video updates on just the whole pandemic, all the data, talking to different people and that kind of stuff. But he's very much mainstream. And we published a video, or we showed a short segment from a video from him from about a week ago or 10 days ago, where he talked about something we've talked about in the past, which was the actual official government data in the UK, for example, but this could apply to any other country. Government data in the UK pertaining to the number of people who died from COVID alone. So different governments publish data showing deaths from and deaths with COVID, i.e. deaths where the death certificate recorded only COVID as the cause of death, and COVID deaths where there were other serious comorbidities and COVID contributed in some way or other.
Yeah.
So he was just using data that other people had used, and it was published by the Office of National Statistics in the UK that showed that there were 17,000 people whose death certificates recorded only COVID over the past 2 years. So the official, and this was interpreted, let's say, as there were only 17,000 people, as opposed to the official figure of 170,000, let's say, in the UK. In fact, there were only 17,000 people who had died specifically and only from COVID. So that's what he said. And we actually, that part of the video, we got a strike, or it was taken down. Our video last week was taken down because that was deemed by YouTube to be medical misinformation. Just simply recording or playing a video where someone else
On YouTube.
was saying he didn't get his video taken down, but we got our video taken down because we included a segment of his video talking about that claim,
Government data
showing that 70,000 people only had died from COVID over the past 2 years, as opposed to 170,000 people. So we appealed it, and they agreed that they were a bit precipitous in taking down the video, and they removed the strike, right? Because it's official
I'm still
data.
recovering from the shock
Right. But
of a successful appeal.
right, in response to that, if you just go to the BBC article, the BBC jumped on it. This is from, is it 1 day ago? Yeah. So it was yesterday. They finally got round to this, and they cite him and a few others. But of course, the problem was that this data from the Office of National Statistics in the UK went kind of viral. So the BBC felt that it had to bring out its, as you see there in the byline, the Health and Disinformation Reporter. Now, the BBC has, over the past couple of years, I think it's only over the pandemic time, have actually created a job, one maybe of several different jobs, a job for several different people called Disinformation Reporter, where their primary goal is to, well, the implication is that these people have the truth, and they're going out there searching for disinformation, and then they're reporting on it, right? So this disinformation reporter, Rachel Schreier, whatever her name is, took up this claim, 17,000 died of viruses, factually incorrect. And of course, interestingly, they use a kind of an appeal to emotion, essentially, in the reporting of it, and they have this guy, this picture at the top, Matt Fowler. If you look at the third paragraph, Matt Fowler lost his dad to COVID-19 in April 2020. Ian Fowler, the father, was 56 at the time of death and lived with type 2 diabetes, which his son said had a minor, barely perceptible impact on his life that he controlled with his diet. But the suggestion that only 17,000 people in England and Wales have died of COVID completely discounts the deaths of people like Ian. So anyway, they go on down. The next headline or next subheading is kernel of truth. That COVID myths that spread on social media often have a kernel of fact at their heart. A real statistic that gets misused, according to this Disinformation Reporter. And then the ONS themselves, who published the data, if you just there at the last, described the 17,000 figure as factually incorrect and highly misleading. So deaths which would not have been counted in the 17,000 figure include people with asthma, diabetes, and irregular heartbeat or high blood pressure, all conditions with which many people can expect to live a normal lifespan. And then if you just go down to how death certificates really work, which is the next one, she uses an analogy. I don't know, where is it? In some an example, blah blah blah, an extreme example. Next below that, just below that, in the second paragraph there. An extreme example: imagine someone is stabbed but had an irregular heartbeat, which contributed to a cardiac failure when they were attacked. The irregular heartbeat might appear on their death certificate, but we wouldn't say the person who stabbed them was not responsible for their death. Now, that's an example of, I mean, she's using that as an analogy or as an example for COVID. Now, that's highly, the title of this article is factually incorrect, and the ONS said that it was highly misleading or something like that. But that an example she uses to try and make the point, to try and get people to understand why this figure is misleading, is in itself misleading.
Yeah.
Because, someone who stabs someone is not the same as a respiratory virus that circulates every year and has done for hundreds of years or thousands of years in the human population. That's not the same as someone who, with agency, goes up and kills someone. You can't compare those two things, or you can't equate those two things. It's ridiculous, Yeah. It's but just on the if you just go to the next one is blogs.ons.gov.uk. This is actually where I think this is the Office of National Statistics blog, and they're the ones who released this data, and they more or less say the same thing. If you just go down to understanding causes of death, doctors are required by law to certify the cause of death to the best of their knowledge and belief. Now that immediately tells you that it's difficult for any doctor to actually ascertain or determine the actual cause of death. They use their medical expertise to decide the cause based on symptoms, physical examination, hospital records, blah, blah, blah. There's a huge range of pre-existing conditions that can be listed on the death certificate, from heart disease and cancers to obesity and heart arrhythmias. For the more than 140,000 deaths that were due to COVID, it has been determined that COVID-19 was the underlying cause of death as opposed to one of these pre-existing conditions. It's a thorny issue that's come up over and over again. We've talked about it repeatedly over the past 2 years. This isn't new. Obviously, for some people it might be new, but we have talked about it repeatedly. Other people have talked about it repeatedly, going way back to like really early days of this pandemic, so-called pandemic, were about reporting on the numbers of deaths and people who were in ill health. Now, I'll just throw this up as go to the next ONS just to give you the official data. So in case we run afoul of the Ministry of Truth at YouTube, just go down to the little table there. This is the averages of those who have died with COVID-19. You can see it there: persons, male, female, median and mean ages, basically 83, 82 and a half. As noted by us and other people before this, the average age of people who have died with or from whatever COVID, who had COVID on their death certificates, was above the age of life expectancy in the UK. So that highlights one of the points we've made repeatedly over and over again as well, which is that this virus is primarily only dangerous to people who are at or above life expectancy, and that demographic tends to have, a lot of them tend to have significant comorbidities. I just wanted to, again, it's a thorny issue, but I just wanted to use an analogy myself, since analogies seem to be the thing to make your argument about this topic, is that if a man or a woman, elderly, let's say at the average age of COVID deaths, 82, 83 years old, with some underlying conditions, was out for a walk, could still walk, was healthy enough to go out for a walk, and was walking along a riverbank or a canal, and something happened, dog chased them, whatever, bicycle bumped them, they fall in, and they drown. What's the cause of death?
The person on the bike.
Well, no, it was drowning, right? But, well, if
Yes, okay. I have to think medically like a doctor, not like a police detective.
but it was accidental, right? Dog, whatever, tripped. Don't
Yes,
don't fixate
no.
on the person,
Yeah,
how they
the
fell in.
medical issue is they died because they were asphyxiated or suffocated because the lungs were full of fluid, so they would say drowning. Yes.
Right. But is it not reasonable to argue in that case that the cause of death was infirmity and the inability to swim?
Or
And-
to avoid the bicyclists.
Well, forget it, whatever. Let's say they're in the water
Okay.
from whatever cause, accidental, they trip, whatever. That's force of nature, act of God. So there's nobody else involved. They trip and fall.
Okay.
Obviously, you're not going to involve the stone they trip, or you're not going to blame the stone they trip. It's a good example, though, of how if you're filling in a death certificate and you're describing the chain of events
Yeah.
that led to death, in that situation, you might actually include a stone on the bank of the river or the canal that the person tripped on. That was the first chain in the chain of events, or first element in the chain of events that caused their death. But then, so they fall into the river and they drown. Why did they drown? Because if you take 20 years off their life, if you put them at 60 years old, a 60-year-old person in the same condition, let's say, that same person, 20 years younger, would not have drowned. So drowning was the cause of death, but what really was the cause of death?
They're frail, their age.
Right. Maybe they had a kind of comorbidity, whatever. So I'm just trying to highlight in my analogy,
The context in which these victims
Right,
died is
right.
that they were very old.
their inability to survive a respiratory virus, a relatively normal respiratory virus circulating that causes some people to die because they're not able to fight it off. I suppose the point in all of this is that the counter to the BBC and their rebuttal of anybody saying that only 17,000 people, or a very small percentage of the actual official numbers, really only actually died from COVID, the BBC's counter to that is no, they all died of COVID. But that's not the case in the kind of analogy I'm using, or the way I think is reasonable to look at it, which is that the thing that causes people, and again, the average age is 82.5 years old, the thing that causes most people who are at or above life expectancy age to die is the fact that they're at or above life expectancy age. That's what causes them to die. There are many different other contributing factors, but fundamentally, the reason they die is because it's their time to die. And of course, society can and does try to minimize and prevent the amount of people who will die or fall ill and die from various different causes. But ultimately, you're not going to be able to stop it. And I think governments have, long before now, a couple of years ago, they strayed into that area of we must stop all these people from dying, when they had never done that before. They'd never done it with the flu before. Every year around the world, influenza and other respiratory viruses cause a lot of death amongst, again, elderly people with comorbidities, and governments have never tried, in the way that they have done over the past 2 years, to stop those people from dying. But they decided to do that with coronavirus, with the effect that they then spread that out to everybody in society, people who were not in danger from this virus, and imposing restrictions on them and causing all of the effects that we've talked about before. all of the negative effects we've talked about before in terms of the lockdowns and the restrictions on society and restrictions on people's lives, all of the knock-on effects, seriously negative knock-on effects on many different people for whom this virus was not an issue at all. So it's weird that I don't know. The whole thing is just weird to me, and it's hard to tease it out. We're two years down the line. There's been so much said about it, so much misinformation and disinformation about it, and actual reasonable, accurate information and reasonable, accurate argumentation against government policies has been shut down by government, by the media, to the point where you wonder if there's any point in even
saying anything.
Trying to dig into it and trying to. But
here we are, and you keep doing it.
I know,
fair
but,
play to you.
and you know what? You know what the problem is? The problem is that what I just said seems to be a reasonable
Yeah.
take on it, and it's a very simple take. It's very simple, and I've said it over and over again
In different ways.
And there's no. I don't think there's no way anybody can disagree with the argument, with the fact, with the statement that this virus was not a danger to anybody who was relatively young and healthy. The vast majority of them, as has been said by government, officials and health ministers over and over again, that the vast majority would not have any significant problem with it, would not end up in hospital. Even those who do end up in hospital would not end up dying from it, and even and those who end up dying from it would be very small. So in that context, that's been known for a long time. Why the massive rollout of punitive, draconian, totalitarian, effectively, restrictions on people's freedoms? That's the question. Why? When there's no justification for it. There's no reasonable justification for it. And you can't get an answer to that question. You can't talk about that. The only way they would shut you down, if you ever try to talk in that way, is that you want Granny to die, or that, ad hominem attacks.
Which was very much the first line of attack on that explanation at the outset. Remember?
Yeah.
It was incredible how worked up people got. So what you're saying is you want Granny to die.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying Granny is old and she could die at any moment because she's alive on Earth.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying, of course, a reasonable policy would be to identify people who were at risk from this and any other respiratory virus and take whatever medical measures necessary, or even non-medical interventions necessary to protect those people. And they themselves would be participants in that. They would, go along with it. They would facilitate those measures for them, and they would do it willingly because they know that they're in danger and they would be protecting themselves. But that's only a tiny % of the population, and the rest of the population just carries on. Why that didn't happen? I mean, I know this is an elementary question, and it's been asked over and over again over the past 2 years, but no one ever asked it. No one ever addressed it correctly or gave a reason why that could not have been done from the very beginning. It's almost like people tried to say that over and over again. Listen, just isolate those people in danger. Vaccinate those people in danger. Leave the rest. There's no problem for the rest. They said that, but it was just met with a blank. They were just blanked or stonewalled. And they stopped asking it. They stopped saying it. They stopped bringing it up.
Yeah.
And to date, no one has ever given, no official source has ever actually responded to that point as to why that was not done. We didn't know, or blah, blah, blah. Man, again, they did know. The data was in very early on. Like I said, this was only dangerous to a small percentage of the population. So why not protect them and leave the rest of society alone? Don't know. Well, we do know. At this point, we do know. Because Justin Trudeau is fleeing in the face of people who are very angry at him and others in government who did that. And he's gone into hiding because of it.
Yeah.
Like so many little tinpot dictators. Are we going to get banned for saying all this?
I don't know. I mean, look how cautious people are
again
in what they say.
Yeah, just throw up just just to finish on that point. Just to make the point about the negative effects of lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. Again, we've talked about this repeatedly over and over again. It's been in the media. The 3 Telegraph articles, Scotty. First one is deaths of people whose medical care was disrupted, quadrupled in the first COVID lockdown, i.e. denial of primary care to people who, again, it's weird. denial of primary care to people who were not in danger. You know, so while the government was focusing on people, let's say, and wants to highlight people who had some kind of a comorbidity, some kind of underlying illness, and then COVID was related, or they say caused their death. They want you to focus on those people and include those people in the COVID statistics. But there are people who, similar, probably, who knows, we don't know the data, but maybe as many or more people in the same category who had illnesses that came on them during lockdown, who didn't get primary health care and died as a result. Now, are they included as COVID deaths? If they had a positive test 28 days before their death, then they would be included in COVID deaths. But that's not what killed them. What killed them was lockdowns. What killed them was denial of primary care by the government. So the next one, again, it's like, look at the date in this next one. How many times have we talked about this? But it's like, again, it's like, okay, it's good that they're promoting it and talking about it, but it's like 2 days old. And it again talks about this nudge unit business, the behavioural psychologists in the British government and, of course, in every other government, at least in the Western world, who use fear and loathing and terror tactics against the population, psychological terror tactics, in order to get them to comply with policies that were not necessary for them, with medical policies that were not necessary for them, because they're healthy people.
The headline is Government Nudge Unit, which we've discussed before, the behavioural psychologists hired by the government, quote, use grossly unethical tactics to scare public into COVID compliance, end quote. So my question would be, for example, to YouTube, is the British government, in using grossly unethical tactics, were some of those unethical tactics the use of medical misinformation?
Yeah.
Did they misinform the population about the medical situation to get them to do things? You know, it's...
Well, certainly when they say they used MPs launched investigation after psychologists criticised totalitarian tactics of deploying fear, shame, scapegoating. So they deployed fear. What was the nature, what were the tactics that employed fear? Or what was the data, what was the messaging around fear? It would have been around numbers of deaths, the numbers of people with COVID, the number of people dying of COVID, all that kind of stuff. And now, again, this is what we're talking about. We're bringing up the question of those numbers of people dying with COVID that were used to instill fear in the population and whether they're actually accurate. Did COVID actually kill those people? A person who, you know, again, was frail, had serious underlying health conditions, and COVID pushed them over the edge. Can you use that death to instill fear in a young person that they also will die from COVID? Because look at this example of someone who is 82 years old with diabetes and liver disease or kidney disease. That person died of COVID, and therefore you, Neil, also at your 25 years young, will also die. That's a fear tactic, right? That's a unethical fear tactic because it's not true. Fundamentally, it means it's not true.
Well, the Australian
Grossly
government ad,
unethical. Yeah.
remember that one? Where it's just a horrible scene of someone dying on a ventilator in a hospital.
Right.
And that was it, just 20 seconds of that and then get vaccinated.
Yeah.
And the implication, just strong, in fact, the explicit messaging that accompanied such advertising campaigns was that everyone from 5 to 85,
Right.
you're at risk of ending up like that unless you get vaccinated.
So it's not just
That's
unethical.
medical
Misinformation. It's not just unethical, it's false. It's unethical because it's false.
Yeah.
If you just go to the last one, and this is basically up to date, this is 3 days ago. Again, it's the same story. It's the Telegraph, for some reason, and other mainstream media outlets seem to be repeating this. This is a 3-day-old article that we talked about maybe 2 weeks ago, where there were other articles saying more or less the same thing, and they're just repeating it, which is that right now, most COVID hospital patients in England are not being treated primarily for virus. Just 36% of patients are now true COVID cases. So why continue the hysteria? Why continue the drive for vaccination? Why continue, it's become endemic in the population. It's an endemic respiratory virus that is similar to a cold. why continue restrictions? Why mask mandates? Why vaccine mandates? Question that doesn't have an answer, apparently. It doesn't have a nice answer. Yeah. And just go to the Times of Israel since we're still on COVID. We've been we're on, yeah, well, it's not all been COVID, okay, it's been about truckers too, but we better get off COVID soon because we're going to, the more we talk about COVID, the more chance we have of running afoul. Israel, world number 1 in daily COVID cases per capita. Israel is also number 1 in rollout of vaccines and boosters.
Yeah.
Do vaccines work?
That's just a fact, and you just leave that fact standing. You don't need to say anything else.
Do vaccines work the way it was claimed they work? If that's the case, if you remember, we were all told that vaccines were the way out of this. But the sad fact is that we're not in it anymore anyway. And data like this, COVID cases per capita, number 1, blah blah blah. It's lacking context. Omicron, so there's a lot of people in Israel who have the cold. Should we just take that headline and change it to lots of people in Israel have the cold? CDC, we want to hear from the CDC as a final point, as you know, the final word on COVID and vaccination from the CDC. Fauci. Throw it up there, Scotty.
He's still going.
This is a study, large study, involving 18% of the US population, i.e. everybody, all the data from California and New York. It's not very long, but basically what is added in this report there is a summation of it. And it's really the last line. By early October, persons who survived a previous COVID infection had lower case rates than persons who were vaccinated alone, i.e. natural immunity. And that is not limited to people who survived a previous infection, at least not in the way you might think, because surviving a previous infection can be surviving a previous infection that was asymptomatic.
Yeah, you didn't
So
even
the
know
question
it.
here is how many people in the world have been exposed to this virus, have natural immunity. Whatever number that is, those people have stronger immunity than those who are vaccinated. From the CDC. Is it not over? Or is the band going to make it? Is the Fauci band going to make it?
I think, well, we'll see. I don't know what I think. I can't say what I think. I have things here from, well, there's the guy, the Harvard doctor who spoke to some subcommittee this week on, do I even mention it?
Put it up there. It's not us saying it.
That's not Harvard, it's a Yale epidemiologist. Let's see what he has to say about the state of play with the COVID.
On the vaccines.
Yeah. Yeah, on the vaccine, which is, of course, the main and only weapon in the war against COVID, right?
Right.
What's he speaking to? I'm not sure. I guess it's in Congress, United
Yeah.
States Congress.
Oh, he started talking. He's not supposed to do that.
It's actually published a statement about this in their week 42 weekly report that showed that people who've had COVID and then get vaccinated have lower levels of anti-nucleocapsid antibodies. And this means, and since the vaccines don't address the nucleocapsid antigens, they only address the spike, it means that they're doing something that's damaging the immune response in a more general way than just what they do with the spike. And this is empirical data that Public Health UK has published. So we know that this is happening. It's not a theoretical issue about all of the niceties of laboratory biology and virology of things that could happen. It's a real thing that's been really observed by their testing.
Right. So basically, what he's saying something that, again, I've seen it across the board, and it's hard to take, although I'm used to it by now. But lots of people coming out, authoritative people coming out and saying stuff that we have said 6 months, 1 year, 18 months ago. We're saying over and over again, and you have to wonder, how the hell were we able to see that, and they weren't?
Because we're conspiracy theorists.
Anyway, what he's saying basically is, like I said, what we've said before, which is that the vaccination with the current mRNA vaccines force your immune system essentially to target spike protein on, basically it was for the alpha, the delta variant, whatever, and it doesn't really work very well with Omicron, and that narrow targeting or narrow focusing of your immune system onto one specific part of the spike protein from a previous variant means that your immune system is compromised in dealing with other variants, let's say newer variants like Omicron. It doesn't deal very well with it. Therefore, he's basically said that people who have been vaccinated have lower levels of antibodies than people who haven't been vaccinated, people who have natural immunity, which is kind of like what the CDC was just saying. He's kind of echoing in a different way what the CDC were saying, that being vaccinated is inferior in terms of dealing with this virus as it is now than natural immunity, because vaccination is too limited in terms of its focus on how it focuses your immune system. That may have other implications for immune response to other pathogens or other viruses or other bacteria down the line. We don't know. We're going to find out, I suppose. But I think it bears out what we've been saying all along, that people who are healthy aren't really in any danger from this virus.
I think the answer to your question is actually pretty obvious. Like you said, like, well, how? Well, no, because you said, well, how is it that what we've been saying all along, all these so-called experts are now coming out and saying it? And the answer is because all those people who really are experts, I was kind of foaming at the mouth on Facebook about this. It's like these people who are the real experts are the ones who are saying, no, we need to hold up here, blah, blah, blah. Let's not go crazy. What about this? What about that? They're the ones who are being fired from their jobs and banned from YouTube and told that they're crazy. So all these people who say, oh no, why aren't you listening to the experts? The answer is, well, like, you guys were listening to the experts when no one else was.
Right.
And everyone else was listening to the people who they thought were experts, who were being promoted as experts.
Yeah.
So actually...
Well, experts with an agenda. There's experts with an agenda and experts without an agenda. And we tended to focus on the experts without it, who didn't appear to have an agenda. That an agenda would distort data, let's say, or present a particular picture of the whole pandemic that was not exactly accurate. We tended to identify those people and, point out how their agenda, that was their agenda, and then give counter evidence from people who didn't have that agenda, who simply had an agenda that was led by the actual data and reason and sanity and the broad picture. And so, yeah, it's hard teasing all this out, really, and trying to present it in a way that people who have drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak, will be able to accept and understand. But again, it comes back to something again that we've said many times before, which is that it's very difficult for people to follow the data and the evidence to its logical conclusion, because the logical conclusion is a conclusion that it's unsavory, because it implies something about the powers, the authorities and governments in this world. It implies something about them and their intentions towards the people that is very disturbing for most people.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to change facts and presentations of data. This is proven by studies, actually. Do not change people's minds. It's emotional content.
Right.
It's the shock, which has always a key emotional component, that changes people's mind. It's only when they're directly affected, when their 12-year-old becomes another vaccine victim, and they go and they seek compensation, and then they learn, first rule, there's no compensation because the companies are indemnified against that. And they go, okay, well, who do I sue in the government? And the government goes, no, you can't sue us either. You willingly let your 12-year-old do that.
Your choice, yeah.
It was your choice. And
Except
then
it was-
and only then will they have this thing. Well, the question will drive them and propel them through the stages we've been through. The other available means is the social proof element of seeing others upset by it and expressing it. And it's not even that they're hearing, say, the Canadian truckers and listening to the rational arguments presented by the Canadian. It's not, they're not hearing the facts. They're not
Right.
reading the placards and going, I never thought of that, actually. They're feeling something. They're feeling, wait a minute, that's the guy who delivers my Amazon stuff. And that guy over there, he's my neighbor. He's a cool guy. I really like him.
So it's getting people
And they're
together,
going-
basically.
Actually, I'm with them.
So it's getting people together where they can hear each other and talk to each other, which is interesting because that's what the government has done precisely the opposite of.
That's-
Forced that on people over the past few years through
Isolation.
separating people from each
As
other.
I keep saying, contextual evidence for the whole showdown before this. 50 countries on earth were seeing massive anti-government protests. In October, November, December of 2019, a quarter of the world's countries had states that were kind of trembling, not least here in France. And that all was kaboom, went into shutdown. I'm not saying it was the thing, but it was an interesting consequence of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it's all about people's choice then. Government would say that people have chosen all of this. I'm sorry you took the vaccine, it was your choice. But it was a choice that was made under the influence of grossly unethical tactics to scare the public into COVID compliance. Is that a choice? It's not exactly a free choice, right? When you're under that kind of influence.
Yeah. But that's why people cite the Nuremberg Code in specifically the part where the population must be fully informed.
Yeah.
Legal challenges aren't. Well, there are some legal challenges that are working, but legal challenges in terms of compensation and justice after the fact of an injury or a death, I don't think they're going to go anywhere.
No.
There are obviously injunctions that are working, especially in the American court system, against the mandates. That's a preventative to further damage being done to society. But
All right. Next. Russia.
Russia's behind it all, obviously.
Somebody
Russia is
made that claim. Some news person made that claim about the truckers. That there was Russian agitators involved in the
Wait,
Canadian truckers.
Did you say Russia?
Yes.
Hang on.
Do it. Oh my god. DEFCON.
That's the red alert for the red commie threat.
Okay.
All right,
You
carry on.
You better play that repeatedly because we're going to be saying a lot of stuff about the red commie threat right now.
Yeah, it was mentioned by. It's funny. It was only mentioned, I think, by one mainstream news anchor in Canada. So that didn't smack of any kind of concerted, centrally directed Canadian government effort. I think she spontaneously suggested that on her news show. This whole thing this isn't very Canadian, and she's trying to encourage whoever she was interviewing. Have you thought of it? Maybe the Russians are behind this. You know?
There's a guy who follows us on Twitter asked us to comment on a tweet by the Russian embassy. If you just throw it up there, Scotty, the Russian embassy in the UK, it's got a nice picture of Lavrov because it's quoting him. Lavrov said today, if our attempts to agree on mutually acceptable principles of ensuring security in Europe fail, we will take countermeasures. They could come in all shapes and sizes. The President will make decisions based on proposals by military commanders. I think that's definitely DEFCON commie right there.
It goes good along with Lavrov's like super serious expression there.
Yeah. DEFCON the commies are coming.
Look at him. Obviously a red commie.
Yeah. So explain, tease that out there, Neil. What's Lavrov what's he going to do?
This is the Russian government standing firm on the line it has drawn on NATO expansion, specifically incorporating Ukraine into NATO de facto, never mind de jure, legally and officially and whatever. He's talking, look, the US has been saying since December, hang on a minute, Ukraine isn't a part of NATO. And anyway, if it wants to join, it's very welcome to join. The Russians are saying, no, the line we're drawing is the missile systems, the weapons you're dumping into Ukraine, which is de facto making it NATO territory. That we want to stop. Red line, red line. So he was just underscoring that we're not happy with your reply, which finally came from Washington and Brussels this week.
We know that
He said a lot of cool things this week. Do you want me to say some other things?
Yeah.
Um,
Say some other things there.
so in Moscow's response to the month-late response to the Russian draft treaty, it was effectively a short draft treaty with 8 points that Russia issued. Putin probably wrote them himself, sent last month. They finally responded. Lavrov said about, we don't know what they said because the Americans asked the Russians to not publish the contents, and they agreed, being all diplomatic and polite. Anyway, they did respond off the cuff about it. Lavrov said, if it is up to the Russian Federation, there will be no war. We do not want wars. But he stressed, however, that officials, quote, will not allow our interests to be brutally attacked or to be ignored either. According to Lavrov, Washington's response to Moscow's proposals is, quote, almost a model of diplomatic decency. However, he said that NATO's answer to the two Russian draft documents, quote, is so ideologized, it breathes the exclusivity of the alliance, its special mission, its special purpose. If they insist that they won't change their position, we won't change our position either. So that supports that's the other statement from the minister was saying earlier, that we're not moving, i.e. we still have a military option ready to go, or 2 or 3, or who knows, or it could be asymmetric. They suggest that statement also suggests it may not actually be coming at you via Ukraine. It may not even be military in nature or overtly military in nature. It's interesting. It's causing we joked about it last week, the spat between the Prime Minister and the President of Croatia. It's not a big country, no, but still, it's a former NATO member. There is also kind of it's not just a tiny part of Europe. It's one of the old ex-Yugoslavian countries, republics, and it's Slavic. So there's a split going on there. After I think the president said, if shit kicks off in Ukraine, we're taking any Croatian deployments away from Eastern Europe. Then the Prime Minister came back and said, no, we're not actually. The President doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, the President responded to him. What did he say? He responded by calling his own Prime Minister a Ukrainian agent. Published yesterday.
Well,
so anyway, that just goes to show you the kind of fractious nature of this is having within governments within Europe.
Yeah.
And not only that, between Washington and Kiev, all week long, the Kiev government has been pleading with Washington.
Just throw that one up, Scotty.
To tone down the rhetoric.
So this is Zelensky, the Ukraine Prime Minister, asked the West to tone down the panic. So what does that tell you? Like when you have Ukraine, who's like, oh, Ukraine's being invaded, Russia's going to get Ukraine, somebody save Ukraine, poor Ukraine. And then the Prime Minister of that country says, can you all just chill out a little bit? And he was saying that, for good reason he's saying that, is because there's a kind of all that panic and hysteria about Russia's going to invade Ukraine, despite the fact that Russia's saying, no, we're not really going to invade Ukraine. And all of the hysteria around it is causing a kind of capital flight out of Ukraine, and it's hurting their economy. And he's like, can you just calm down a little bit, because you're turning us into this kind of place that no one wants to have anything to do with, because it's about to be destroyed by Russia. So it's interesting, and it highlights the fact that I think that's a reasonable conclusion at this point, if it wasn't before, which is that the people who want sanctions against Russia, regardless of what Russia does, is America and it's some of its allies. They want sanctions. They want to be able to smack Russia with the worst sanctions they've ever seen for reasons other than Ukraine or anything else.
Yeah.
It's like the US keeps talking about it and ramping it up, and its media keeps ramping it up. If you go to like the other RT1 there, Scotty, about the German MP, the head of the German Navy had to resign last week because he was caught on video in India saying that Russia, Putin just wants respect. He just wants to be shown some respect, and he deserves respect. And Crimea isn't probably coming back, so forget about all that. Let's just show him some respect, and let's just be civil, and everything will sort itself out. Which is kind of what, which is pretty much what the Russians have been saying. We want some respect, and you to respect our interests. And America's response by saying, "No, you're going to invade Ukraine. Sanction. We're going to give you horrible sanctions." But there's another German MP who came up with a really stunning, really highbrow. Must have, spent weeks trying to figure this out.
I think he was meditating on a mountain for weeks.
He must have been.
And he was enlightened by the end of his hike.
German Member of Parliament Klaus Ernst said that guarantees of Ukraine not joining the US-led military bloc would help resolve the current tensions. That's a pretty shocking conclusion there, but I don't know how he came to that conclusion, apart from the fact that that's what Russia's been saying over and over again. And he said, to defuse the situation in the short term, the West must assure Russia that Ukraine will not be admitted to NATO. It would be best if Ukraine was given a status like Finland, a status of neutrality. He was referring to Finland's long-standing tradition of not formally allying itself with military blocs. The Nordic country is not a NATO member and maintained neutrality during the Cold War.
Same with Austria.
So, why can't that happen? If Finland's doing it, why can't Ukraine do that?
Because right now in Washington, D.C., they are the think tankers, the neocons, the media there, official media, is hysterical. If they heard that, I'm sure they have, they've referred to other German statements along similar lines in the last few weeks as treasonous. The Germans are betraying us.
Who's saying that? Americans.
The Washington think tankers. The stuff they're coming out with is
betraying us
off the wall.
They're betraying us in what respect? Just to tease it out.
They're betraying us by not presenting a united front to stand up to the aggressor, Russia. Because
in what way is Russia an aggressor?
Well, but this painted the scenario for the whole world this last month that Russia is on the verge of invading Ukraine with 100,000 troops.
Okay, but it's not.
And Biden's made it more specific. Like, in case anyone's in any doubt, this was leaked. Apparently, a leaked transcript, which is freaking weird how this happened, because this is what happened to Trump, which got him impeached when he had a call with Zelensky 3 years ago. Anyway, Biden and Zelensky had a phone call this week, and apparently it did not go well. The transcript was leaked, in which Biden has supposedly told Zelensky that Kiev is on the verge of being sacked. Prepare for impact. That's the belief, or if they don't believe it themselves, that's the kind of rhetoric
that
and
they're
atmosphere in Washington right now that they want everyone to feel globally.
Right. But it's not true. So
It's not
So
true.
why? So let's cut through the bullshit and let's say that Russia is not an aggressor in the way that they're being portrayed. And they're not going to invade Ukraine. They don't want to conquer Ukraine and take it over. Why would America be presenting it in that way? What is their problem with Russia?
In the immediate term, in what's happened recently,
In general, why would the US be doing this at all? Why are they making stuff up? Why are they hystericizing the whole world about Russian aggression when it's not the way they're portraying it? What is their goal?
it's to stymie and arguably cut off, ideally end all Russian trade and cooperation economically, infrastructurally.
Why would they want to do
with
that?
Europe.
And why would they want to do that?
Because they don't want Russian influence in Europe, because American influence has dominated for so long. They don't want to reduce their domination and to give more of the share of economic power to Russia.
Okay, they don't want a
In
unipolar
Europe.
world. They want a world where America is the hegemon and remains the hegemon and dictates terms to everybody.
Yeah.
They don't want any
They
threats.
don't want a multipolar situation where Russia is just
Sorry, they
just
don't want a multipolar world.
has just as big an influence, because that is where it is going. You know, the history of gas pipelines in Russia is fascinating because it goes back to the 1960s. And the first mega deal was signed initially between East Germany, which of course would have been had a communist ideological alliance with Moscow, in a $1 billion deal, massive for its time, to ship gas directly into Germany. Well, West Germany immediately went, hang on, we want some of the action too. And another pipeline was built 4 years later. And the Americans objected, not too loudly, but in the background they were like, what's going on? You know, we don't like the look of this, you know? So it's ever since that day with kind of, it's been a rising and falling pitch over the decades, but now it is at a hysteria level. Why? Because one factor is that West Germany agreed in principle with the Americans to buy their agreement with building energy pipelines from Russia into Europe at the time. They made a deal, strategic deal, no more than 1/3 of Russia, of European energy dependence. It would be limited. It would be a strategic cap.
Can come from Russia.
It's now at 41%
Yeah.
or thereabouts. And you see, the Americans see it ticking up to 50. And then maybe it's their kind of like simplistic profit motive loss benefit calculation. If they see it hit 50.5%, we are now the minority shareholder.
Right, in Europe, yeah. And energy dependence.
At least on that front. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you go to those are kind of statements that have been echoed this week by an ally of Putin. He used an inflammatory statement. It's the RT one. Peace with US. Peace with US only possible after a new world order, according to Putin ally.
Yeah.
So this is Alexei Pushkov, a close ally of Putin, who was chairman of the State Duma Foreign Affairs Committee. He said that the US is a hegemon that is gradually losing its position in the world. They suffered a very serious defeat in the Middle East. They lost Syria. They lost the battle for Afghanistan. They were forced to withdraw almost all their troops from Iraq at the end of 2021. He said that US officials are trying to maintain their dominant influence by having conflict simultaneously with Russia and China, although with different degrees of intensity, which creates a nervous environment both in America and the rest of the world. The US no longer treats us as a secondary power. It doesn't treat Russia as a secondary power anymore, which is why they're scared. They treat us as a paramount power, which is why they cite Russia, not China, as one of the main problems facing the Biden administration in 2022. He warned that 2022 will be a year of crisis between Washington and Moscow. As I understand it, they now want to solve the Russian problem. That is, to subjugate practically all of Europe, pushing Russia to its very outskirts. This is exactly what they need Ukraine for. The next phase will be a political or even military confrontation with China. Could well be.
Yeah.
He says, America's political and financial elite believe they're the only ones who can run the world. So until a new world order is established in which the US is weaker and its role is diminished, we will be in more or less acute political conflict with them.
Yeah.
And he said, the imposition of sanctions against the head of state and against the leader of Russia is a measure that is comparable to severing relations. So that's what's on the cards. I mean, there's a deeper issue here in terms of, obviously there's the political, there's the economic, military competition between the US and Russia and maybe China, whatever, and America's vying for the maintenance or attempting to maintain its position as global hegemon. It sees the threats to that, and it pushes back and creates all sort of ruses and different provocations and conflicts and whips up other countries, especially in Europe, in order to demonize its perceived enemies or its real enemies, at least economically and militarily. But there's a cultural aspect as well. and it kind of goes deeper down into the problem. What is the difference? Is there a difference in ideology and cultural beliefs and the way that the two elites see the world, or the peoples in those countries see the world? I mean, you mentioned before that, who was it? Was it Clapper said that claimed that the Russians are genetically prone to lying?
The Russians, Clapper said, I think he said, not just lying, but he said the Russians, it's in their genetics to be subversive, to come in and take over, like this program running through the DNA of the whole world, and it can come at any, it's actually consistent. It fits the narrative that they've been pushing since 2016 in a big way. That you don't understand the Russian mind. It's not just that he'll attack you this way, but it'll come up through your neighbor. Your neighbor will suddenly start saying things to you, and it'll sound strange and foreign to you. That's because the Kremlin has put thoughts in his head.
Right.
So when he's talking about freedom and the Constitution or the Bible, or what the hell is going on in Washington, or trucker convoy and stuff like that, your neighbor isn't actually your neighbor anymore. He is now literally, the Kremlin is in his mind, telling him what
Ideological subversion, basically.
That is what they actually want the whole world to see it as. Yeah.
So they see Russian
Ideological, spiritual, even
spiritual, cultural,
genetic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If we just go to the last RT article, the Russia's Ministry of Culture published this week a draft setting out what they call traditional values, posted on the ministry's website, and it was posted for consultation ahead of being presented to Putin, and it provides the foundations. It's designed to provide the foundations of government policy for the protection and strengthening of traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. So the draft text defines traditional values as moral guidelines that form Russian citizens' worldview, transferring from generation to generation, guaranteeing civil unity, forming the base of Russian civilizational identity and the nation's unified cultural space, and manifesting uniquely and distinctly in the spiritual, historical, and cultural developments of the multi-ethnic people of Russia. According to the order, these examples of these values include life, dignity, human rights and freedom, patriotism, civic consciousness, service to the fatherland and responsibility for its fate, high moral ideals, a strong family, creative work, prioritizing the spiritual over the material, humanism, charity, justice, collectivism, mutual support and respect, historical memory and continuity between generations, and the unity of the peoples of Russia.
And in contrast...
So, well, the thing about it is, most of that, I think, could be said to define the cultural and moral and spiritual values of Americans, at least. In America, just relating this to America here, of certainly American conservatives. No?
Mm-hmm.
If you read that, just put that up again, if you just read that list,
Who disagrees with it?
According to the order, yeah. Who disagrees with that? Life, dignity, human rights and freedom, patriotism, civic consciousness, service to the fatherland, service to the country, responsibility for the country's fate, high moral ideals, a strong family, creative work, prioritizing spiritual over material, humanism, charity, justice,
and so on.
Mutual support and respect, historical.
This is the fundament of why Russia. It's not economic per se. It's greater.
It's also that anyway.
It's also this. Go and listen to this. Go and read the articles by David Frum. He was the chief speechwriter for Obama. He's like a major neocon now, neo-Dem think tanker in Washington. Still is a key influence in DC. His counter meta theory is that you've got to understand what's going on here. Moscow is the world capital of this white supremacist movement, this neo-traditionalist, in quotes, because he wants to denigrate all that.
Right.
Under the guise of he would say under the ideological guise of that list, Russia is trying to subvert the actual decent natural order of things. You see, that's how they both see it. The two elites of the two countries are in this ideological conflict.
If all of those values subvert American values, or subvert America. What does that say about America? Is America the opposite of all those things then?
Yes.
At least the political elite stand
I
for the
think so.
opposite of all those things?
I think so. I think it's
They stand for the opposite of life, the opposite of dignity, the opposite of human rights and freedom, the opposite of patriotism. Certainly they were down on patriotism
in a number of respects.
during the
Yeah.
Trump era.
Yeah.
Human rights and freedom, certainly freedom with the COVID business. They're not too...
Look how easy it is to get abortion everywhere in the West now. Euthanasia.
right.
Um,
A strong family. There's a lot of critique of family and a strong family and family values in the US and the way the state basically has taken over in terms of...
it's being demolished in an acceptable discourse nowadays. The family is like, the last thing that has to be broken to truly liberate
and
people.
that's coming from the West and come from the US, but also some places in Europe. But where's it coming from? Is it coming from government? Ultimately? Obviously, it's coming through all sorts of different groups and organizations and civic groups, but who's enabling those people? Are they organic? Are they rising up organically in society? Maybe they are, but is the government promoting them? It seems to be. They seem to be getting a lot of... and the media is certainly promoting them.
They are the government. Look at France. So it's sort of a neutral in between. It's on the European continent, so it's not American for sure, but it's also in the Western orbit in general, historically, not just in the current context, right? Like there's a kind of a criticism of the current set of values as promoted in official France and quasi-official, so unofficially as well, culturally, the current cultural norms. And I've seen a great analysis that shows that these were things that were introduced with the 1968 student/liberal arts revolution that saw eventually de Gaulle kicked out of power in France. And they're referred to as the 1968ers. Many of them went on to become key political leaders culturally in France, not just politically. So we are, in a sense, living at the end of a specific kind of regime with specific sets of values. And I think that's why when Putin arrives on the scene with his slowly building conservative / traditional ideology, it's not even properly articulated, but this is an attempt to do so. They see it as antagonistic to them, to the elites anyway. It's a kind of, maybe Jordan Peterson would say it's a postmodernist thing, and he probably puts the timeline around the late 60s as well as when this began. But if you look up the 1968ers in France and what they wanted to see introduced, the liberalization of the individual from the oppressive patriarchy, the oppressive quote-unquote norms on society. Okay, so that's official France today. Okay, it was just a one-off, maybe. Well, not really, because it's a recurring issue. The fact that the president of France thinks it's okay
to promote that,
because he is promoting it by definition. Now he will probably nitpick with you and say, "Well, hang on a second, it's just inclusivity."
Right.
Because the day after that, I went to a church in Nice,
right,
and promoted that by virtue of being present there,
Yeah.
right?
But one undermines the other, no?
Yes.
And
I mean, they're mutually incompatible, really.
The contrast is interesting because back on this article that we're just reading, it says, last month President Putin told journalists that he believes progressive Western ideas are infiltrating Russia, particularly in the area of LGBT rights. I believe that the traditional approach is correct, he commented. Male is male, female is female, mother is mother, and father is father. I sincerely hope that our society has the moral armor to protect us against
the moral armor.
this.
But that's go back to that text. That's interesting. Like when he talks about in the area of LGBT rights, he specifies what they are. Now that you could construe that as him being homophobic or whatever, but I don't think that's the case. What he's focusing on specifically is, which a lot of, I think most members of most gay people agree, at least in terms of what I've seen on social media and stuff. There's a lot of members of the gay community basically are against that as well, that idea of male not being male,
Yeah.
female not being female, mother not being mother, and father not being father, and redefining and changing the meaning of those words and their roles. That's got nothing to do with homophobia or being anti-gay or homophobic, right? So it's you can be demonized for saying that kind of thing, but it's very specific. You have to dig down into the details of what's actually happening, and it is anti-humanistic. Basically, it's got nothing to do with sexuality. It's got to do with basic human values that apply to everybody, regardless of their sexuality, but regardless of their creed or their sexuality or whatever. That basic human values are being undermined under cover of, like you just said, diversity and inclusivity, right?
Yeah.
Things that are values that are good for everybody, that are positive and good and reinforcing for everybody.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is there's some elements within society, within any human society, within the human population that are kind of deviant, and they should not be given. And they're always a small minority, and they should not be given a platform worthy of a majority.
They should not necessarily be punished, especially if they have committed no crimes by law. If they get through society by manipulating people, but they never break a crime, so be it. That's buyer beware. That's up to the quote unquote normal population to handle that.
Right, and it does handle.
We've gone all the way to this other extreme.
Where government
giving them power
and criminalizing people who try and who would speak out against it and say that, for example, saying that men are not men and that men can. Men or women, basically, or saying that men can have periods and can give birth, and that saying that biological men are actually women and can compete in women's sports and stuff like that. If you try and speak out against that, clearly false theses, then you risk being, in some way, socially ostracized or censored, or even potentially criminalized. That thought becomes a criminal thought. Anybody and everybody should stand up against that, right?
Yeah. There are parents in North America who are legally barred from seeing their children because those children have undergone or wish to undergo gender reassignment. And that parent, the ostracized one legally, disagreed with it. And the court ruled in favor of the other parent there's one particular case where it wasn't about favoring one parent, which is an adult, over another. It was actually, the argument was made that the minor had the legal right to determine what they would do.
Well, it's subversion of a natural order.
That is completely, you're subverting everything. We all agreed collectively that 18, it varies a little depending on what the issue is, but 18 is the cutoff point. Once they start going in, it came to the point where when vaccine mandates came along and parents said, no, we don't want they just went in with their media campaigns and said, well, we're just going to go straight to your kids. We're going to go to their schools. They'll be vaccinated and then they'll come home. But the first thing you learn about is that they are vaccinated and you have no say in it. Well, there was precedent for it. That didn't just come out of the blue. There's this ongoing drive to separate everyone from everyone else, to break all bonds, to break all values,
And all sanity and reason as well, because
it only ends up hurting them.
Yeah, and suggesting that children, for example, at 5 or 6 years old, should be able to make decisions about their medical treatment on their own, about their sexuality, and then agree to have some kind of medical procedure in order to change their sexuality. I mean, who agrees with that? It's been promoted, but who in their right mind agrees with that? That any child, because if you agree with it, you're agreeing with the premise that small children can take serious life-altering decisions, should be allowed to make serious life-altering decisions, and that the opinions of their parents are relevant if they conflict with that of the child. When has that ever been true in human history? When has that ever been sane in human history? But someone is promoting that.
Yeah.
Someone is promoting that idea, and it's not being pushed back against by government, which would lead you to conclude that government is tacitly agreeing with it. Eastern Ukraine.
It's freaky as hell.
Manipulative media stories. Stick it up there, Scotty. Give me your blink on that one.
BBC article from today. In eastern Ukraine, war-weary soldiers and civilians await Russia's next move.
Not the title, though.
Oh, Jesus, by Orla Guerin.
No.
It's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
There's a photo of a female soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably,
Maria.
this is a
Maria is stationed in Ukraine.
Ukrainian or Kiev government soldier.
Maria is stationed on Ukraine's eastern front line. We are standing our ground, she said. What is that meant to do to people to read that on the BBC News website? People in the West.
Well, it's meant to obviously get their sympathy because here's
Well,
the
also
situation
relates-
in Ukraine is so desperate that the women are,
Right. It also relates to what we're just talking about.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Putting a woman as the face of the military resistance to evil Russia in Ukraine.
right.
When it's bullshit. There's probably, 0.001% of the Ukrainian military is made up of women.
Actually, the Ukrainian government last month conscripted all women from 18 to 65.
Right.
They
But
will
what
do
is-
their part.
But what does that
somewhere.
actually mean? Conscripted them in theory type
Yeah.
thing. In the case of some kind
Yeah.
of a guerrilla warfare or something like that. But in terms of regular troops,
Right.
it's not the case. And you don't, why would you put, I mean, that's just a manipulative appeal to some kind of sympathy in the Western mind that these poor women are the ones that are standing up against evil Putin, the white, male, patriarchal, misogynist, supremacist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff flies under the radar. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And that's just why I pointed it out.
And then there's the other subtext, which is, well, it's more the more in your face text, which is that, go back to the headline.
Well,
So the BBC finally remembers 6 years later that there's been a civil war going on in Ukraine and brings British audience back into it with the implication that the war is Russia's fault. It's a civil war in Ukraine. She's probably holding a NATO-issued rifle, or if it's not, it's somehow gotten into her hands thanks to arms supplies via the Western world, not from Russia.
just and scroll down because the whole article is the same. Next picture is a Ukrainian soldier prepares food in a makeshift kitchen. That's a woman as well.
Is it?
Yeah. And then keep going. Civilians like Ludmila Momot have lived with war since 2014. How long can our suffering continue, she said. So it's all just, fields. It's all about the fields.
Yeah.
Forget about the facts. Forget about understanding what's actually going on. Forget about the broad geopolitical context. Just do the fields thing. So, yeah, that's what the BBC and obviously Western governments want everybody to. That's how they want them to respond. That's the way they want them to respond. They want to respond. They want you and the population to respond in a very particular way to what's going on in the world. And unfortunately, it's in a way that is almost entirely devoid of actual facts and the truth about any given situation. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. Last week, speaking about gas, LNG supplies to Europe hit all-time high.
Yeah.
That's mainly coming from the United States, of course, which is why not? The going's good.
Well,
They're getting a great price in Europe.
that's why they want sanctions.
That's why they want to cut Russia's gas off. Yeah,
Maybe they don't need to get sanctions. Maybe the idea is that they can hype the whole
the
Ukraine
prices
thing,
are driving up just with the media hype.
drive the prices up so that it's more possible or plausible that America's higher priced LNG will be purchased because it's around the same price as because you've driven up the price of Russian gas. Then people will be more amenable to buying American LNG, which is usually more expensive, but not anymore. But also cutting off Russian gas supplies in the absence of or reducing or getting European countries to stop taking delivery of Russian gas supplies, at least some, in the absence of any sanctions, just through hystericization and keeping the whole thing simmering and boiling along, and media reports talking about Russia, evil Russia going to invade. Every time I say evil Russia, you should play the thingy. They can do a lot. They can go a long way to getting the benefits of the sanctions they want to impose on Russia without actually having to impose them.
Yeah, yeah. Here's another headline. Biden is from last week as well. Biden administration issues more gas and oil drilling permits than Trump. Do you remember
What about COP26?
COP26? Go back a little earlier. There was a huge spat during his campaign in 2020 when he was being grilled by journalists, playing to the right, actually, to the conservative base in America. People who drill oil, for example, and they're connected to those communities, where Biden was being called out on his campaigning promise that not only would there not be more gas and oil drilling permits issued by his government, but that they would basically go to zero.
Yeah.
He campaigned, he got the radical left, he got the kind of Bernie supporters, I don't know, even more radical than those, on his side during the campaign by promising to go totally to the wall against all oil and gas.
Yeah.
The actual reality is the US has never pumped as much oil and gas from its own seas and soil in its history. And it's doing it because Russia is trying to keep Europe on side. Well, maybe it's simpler than that. They're just doing it to get rich as prices are driven up by the hysteria they create in Europe. Fact and fiction.
What about that?
Interesting.
Although-
This isn't playing to our emotions now. Is it
It is.
actually cold in Miami?
That's actually a Russian iguana. No, it's a Ukrainian. It's a Ukrainian iguana. He was on the front lines just a few days ago until he was shot by a Russian sniper.
Crazy.
No, this is
And the sniper reached all the way across the Atlantic.
It's a female iguana. of
it's a
course.
female iguana, of course. Yeah,
Oh,
you can tell by the yellow underneath there. It's yeah, it's. I was just wanted to make a point about the weather. It is pretty cold around the world. There's right now most of the US, most of the landmass, Canada obviously as well, but most of the landmass US is at round freezing,
right.
including during the day, right down to Texas,
Coast.
Gulf Coast to Texas, right across. Only a few little areas of Los Angeles and right on the east, on the west coast there, that are still in half decent temperatures, but there's a cold snap. It's only going to last a few days. It only ever does, but it's just this Arctic air being pulled in. It's to do with the jet stream. Florida completely for the next couple of days this weekend. Basically, Florida, all of Florida, night and day around zero. In different places, maybe a bit below zero, but around 0, 1, 2 degrees. the whole peninsula of Florida. It happens now and again. Not that often, but it happens now and again. And of course, it can be a problem if crops, because apparently Florida during the wintertime produces 50% of different vegetables and fruits and stuff for the entire US.
Because of its climate, usually warm.
California being would be the other one primarily, but
Canada's having one of its coldest winters since the 1950s.
Yeah, and of course there's a storm just yesterday hit the
Blizzard.
along the east coast from basically the northeastern states right down to the Carolinas. Cold, freezing temperatures and a lot of snow. But it also, I mean, you can look at these things and look at any of these weather events because they'll change. It'll be the last couple of days and then it'll go back up. But you need to look. You can look at any of them and say, "Well, that happened a few years ago or 10 years ago, whatever," and you can dismiss it, But you need to look at it in the global picture, to get any sense of have any chance of getting a read on whether or not things are changing in terms of if it's a particularly cold winter. It has to be. You have to look at it globally, in the different, and not just northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. Extremely hot in Australia over the past couple of weeks, broke some records in northwestern Australia. But it's also very cold in the northern hemisphere. Definitely this winter, you had Athens completely dumped. Most of Greece basically dumped with a crap load of snow.
Istanbul, Amman, Jordan, blizzard.
In Jordan.
Israel, Syria.
Yeah.
There's massive problems in Syria.
Right.
The infrastructure's tanked, of course, from the war and the sanctions. Didn't we see somewhere that the Aegean Sea started to freeze?
Yeah, there was some sea ice in Greece, yeah. I'm not sure that ever happened before. I think it was a first, basically. So much for global warming and COP26. Of course, we just mentioned COP26, and it's all about removing fossil fuels. And the Biden administration is pumping out more fossil fuels than ever before. So there's a lot of lies, a lot of distortions. Sometimes it's pretty much the opposite of what they say it is. It's the truth is 180 degrees from what they claim it is. So People just need to use their heads these days. I mean, the only thing you have to fall back on is your common sense, along with a healthy skepticism of government. If you can start, like I said, I think at the beginning of the show, with the premise that what comes out of most politicians' mouths, especially in the West these days, is false. Start from there and then look at the situation, and you'll get a better read on what's actually going on than if you go with the standard, oh, they must be telling the truth, Just flip it. I've said that a long time ago as well, but it's still true. It just got worse, actually. It's more true than it ever was, I think, these days. And it'll probably get even more true as time goes on. We really can just take it as the truth. Without even doing your research, just flip it. That's what's going on.
So do you think Russia's going to do something militarily? I was thinking, this...
It's quite possible. That sounds like... It sounds to me like...
Now, these are Russians, so they got us all looking at Ukraine.
Yeah.
So what if they come around the back and they do something off Ireland?
Yeah.
And I think the Irish government are onto them. The Irish government expressed its concern last week over
Russian naval
maneuvers, naval exercises to take place. It's actually a hell of it's a game. Like, they're going to do exercises off the coast of Ireland, the Atlantic, in the Barents Sea, in the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean simultaneously. Flexing muscles.
I think there are Irish politicians complaining that they don't have the kind of primary radar necessary to observe those missiles. Like, but Jesus. But yes, we don't even have the radar to look at them missiles. How are we meant to know what's going on? They could be firing anything up there.
70 years of the Cold War plus this.
Yeah.
And this is the first time they've actually gone,
So we don't have any submarines either.
what do we do? It actually, the extent of the hysteria spread out, and it's fishermen off the west coast of Ireland decided
An armada. They
to
went
send
nose
an
to
armada
nose.
out
Nose
to
to nose.
confront the Russian flotilla as it arrived.
And throw fish at them.
I laughed at it, but they actually had an effect. The Russian government today said
All right, we'll stand down. Just keep your
they're going to do
keep your drunk Irish fishermen away from us.
They're going to do their naval exercise, but
A bit
outside,
further away.
a bit further away.
Of their exclusive economic zone, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's hard for a little country like Ireland, it doesn't have much clout and doesn't have much military or navy. It doesn't have any navy. It's got a few fishing boats.
Well, there's
and
no
stuff.
air defense, so the obvious solution is
Yeah.
obviously Ireland just needs to buy. So it has Triumph S400s have a protection zone of 400 kilometers. Ireland's about
enough.
450 kilometers
Well, that's enough to
north
cover
to
that.
south. So they just got 2 or most 3. If they bought 3 Russian S400 Triumph systems, they could defend from space, the air, and under the water.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
But defend
Ireland's
against,
defenseless.
defend against what though?
Anything.
The Brits,
Anyone.
The
Brits,
English.
Martians, even the Russians.
even the Russians. But the Russians wouldn't let them use it against the Russians. They'd say you can have these as long as you only shoot them at the
Well, that's the
at
question.
the English or
That's
the
what
Americans.
that was implied by the military-industrial complex people in Washington. You don't telling India and Pakistan, you don't want to buy that stuff because they can remotely. But apparently that's not true. Apparently you can actually get control of your own systems.
Yeah.
So they would work against Russians,
Right.
I think.
Hmm.
Who knows though? Maybe they're Russians after all.
I think the Russians should, that in those military exercises, what they're actually going to do. You asked me what I thought the Russians were going to do.
Yeah.
In those naval exercises off the coast of Ireland, they're actually going to stage an invasion of Ireland. They're going to conquer Ireland and use it as other countries in times of war to stage a conquest of England. I mean, the French, hundreds of years ago, the French and the Spanish both tried to do that, wanted to use Ireland as a backdoor into England to conquer England. And I think the Russians have been reading up on that history. And I think that now the time is right to do what...
Finally get Charlie back on the throne.
Exactly, to do what the French and the Spanish were unable to do all those years ago.
The man who should our king had been.
Exactly. And then once they conquer England, they'll put Charles I back on the throne and...
Charles III.
Well, whoever they can dig up, put the Pope on the throne in England.
Sadly, it would no longer be a Stuart. It would be the Duke of something in Bavaria. He's the direct true descendant of.
Is he?
The Kingdom of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Yeah. Because
Is
the
it 10?
Stuarts died out
Died out,
because
yeah.
after Charles III, there was only his brother, Henry, and he died as a cardinal of Rome.
Well, forget
in
about the royals.
1802.
Just put Putin on the throne of England.
Yeah. I'm for that.
All right.
I'm for
Well,
that. You know, we got to call their bluff because they keep saying to anyone who says anything remotely what we said, you're Putin agents.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, bring the Russians here. Where have they been? I mean, seriously, if they were really guilty of a quarter of the things the West accuses them of, all those mass protest movements we've seen in the last decade in the West, the Russians would be all over them, using them to shoehorn in governments to their liking, a la Kiev, right? But they don't.
Yeah.
The bastards. I want them to start acting like the Russians they're accused of being.
Yeah, yeah. They're none to lose at this point, really, would they? Well, they might have something to lose, but who knows? Anyway, I think that's all the news that's fit to
Fit to rant about.
talk smack about so far. It was the same old topics, but that's the topics that are the talking points. I mean, there's obviously other stuff going on here and there, but
Oh, yeah. Well, the Biden thing in Pittsburgh,
yeah, the collapsing bridge.
that's symbolic. He goes to Pittsburgh yesterday to give a speech about America's awesome new infrastructure that he, and not Trump, is going to bring about this year. And a freaking bridge 2 miles from where he was going to give his talk collapses like 4 or 5 hours before he arrives.
Yeah.
Forcing him to go and give a statement at the collapsed bridge about how this is evidence of me.
Yeah.
I'm going to come in and build it all back.
Yeah, yeah. You see, this has provided
This
me a
is
perfect
crazy.
opportunity to build back better. It's like, yeah.
Luckily,
yeah, I
no
would
one
think that-
died. There was 13 people were
It's
injured. but
bizarre, though. It's almost symbolic. Like,
It's crazy.
if you were a kind of, even a superstitious person, you'd take it as symbolic, you know, as an omen, you know. Good omen or a bad omen? I'm not sure. An omen for sure. Anyway, yeah. So, I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching, listening, chatting. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for the comments as well. Yeah, we'll be back next week with another show. So until then, stay safe and watch out for stuff.
See you next time.
Bye.
Can't stop the signal now.